Generic game syndrome, or GGs for short, is an extremely dangerous, often terminal, nearly untreatable disease that stems from the absolute lack of creativity within the AAA gaming space.
Except, this exact same sentiment has been said since at least 2015, and last I checked, between 2015 and 2018, most major multiplayer games released. So clearly they were wrong. But were they?
So I spent some time researching. So much time staring at a screen that I have to see a neurologist about my inability to see the sun without extreme pain. Fuck.
AAA is declining! Is almost as cliche of an opinion as it is false. Kind of. Mine's in a cycle. This article here talks about AAA games having become stale and boring back in 2015. Well, what games came out between 2015 and 2018?
All of them.
It was like the Renaissance, and with all the major multiplayer releases coming out from Valve, the new Marvel game, the new COD competitor, the finals, and sure, some of them may not stand the test of time, but almost certainly some of them will. We are entering another stage of AAA renaissance. But as of currently, games feel terrible, and let me prove it. Name a multiplayer game older than a year, but newer than the last 5 years that you still play. Basically none. The only one I can think of that people still play is Valorant. And if your answer to the question was some form of COD title, stop lying to yourself, we all know those are the same. And statistically speaking, your parents probably believe they taught you better than that. We all know that COD has been releasing the same game for the last 15 years. And despite what I've said, the games we are playing seem to be declining. I mean, ask any Overwatch player whether they're having fun. They're not. So, I know what you're asking. What is this decline? The main thing I see within the AAA space is that games just look and feel generic. Here are some screenshots from 6 games. If you can correctly identify which game is which, congrats! Touch grass!
Fuck ocular migraines. I didn't know that meant going outside.
My point is, it's really difficult to tell what game is which just from looking at a short bit of gameplay. Even after spending a decent amount of time playing these games, sure, I could recognize them. But that's because I have a dozen hours, if not hundreds of hours, in these games. The point is, games are looking more and more similar. And this isn't without good reason. Consider the fact that most games share engines, close developers because of frequent layoffs, and often last so long that the leads on the games had to change, making the games feel more averaged and dulled than the original vision. It's partly symptomatic of the state of the industry, and partly due to the fact that AAA games need to appeal to as many people as possible to be able to survive. Also, I'm tired of saying AAA, so for the rest of this spiel, just let me refer to AAA games as just games, because I'm getting out of breath here. And I'm not making a commercial for a specific autoside rescue service.
Use code for 500 off of your next order.
So, if I think that games are getting more stale and generic than local communion bread, why is it that I'm also saying games aren't declining? Well, the narrative of games declining has been played out for a long time, but still not long enough to reach cognitive decline. The war has been raging ever since AAA games were viewed as graphical showcases. The public taste in games was viewed by companies as wanting more realistic games, which later evolved into this almost standardized neo-futurism realistic style that many games end up aiming for. The stylized games of TF2 and early Overwatch are no longer here. I think few people will claim Overwatch 1 looks better than Overwatch 2, as they are very similar looking. But the changes they did make did improve the game objectively. However, subjectively, it lost a lot of its unique charm in removing many of the sharp edges in hero design, along with the map's art direction. And even new hero mechanics seem less intricate and nuanced than the earlier characters. This isn't meant to be a knock against the current developers. I already slander this game more often than Billy Mitchell was allegedly slandered by Twin Galaxies. However, the game has lost its uniqueness, for lack of a better word. And this is true of almost any game that came out between 2015 and 2018. We have seen all the tricks that these games can give and how well they've sustained, but many of them are also showing their age. Many of these games are being expected to do things the original developers never expected. I mean, imagine what GoldenEye would look like if it was still receiving updates today. How would you even keep that interesting? You would have to keep doing something really, really outrageous. The problem is games are on a long dev/lifetime cycle. And the reason why we will continue to have this issue is because the cycle will continue. We are just spending more time at the bottom of the barrel in the future because games have to take exponentially longer to develop ever since the Xbox 360 PS3 generation. Development has become such a large cost that it's becoming too expensive for games to not sell in the millions or to not contain constant microtransactions.
Alright, son, I'm gonna need you to sell at least 4 million copies or at least 12 million skins, and if you can't achieve that, just don't come back. Well, shit, I'm out of money.
Which is why games are lasting longer. It's easier to grow an asset than to start a new one. But another symptom of games lasting longer is that
Viagra sales are massively declining!
And on an entirely unrelated note, lead designers of all kinds will leave the games industry during this time. If a game is expected to last a decade or more, it might go through 2 or 3 or even more leads. This muddling of leadership will mean that either objectives must change or the new developers have to follow a vision that they didn't create to the best of their ability without knowing what the original intention was behind them. This issue is not only due to people moving on, retiring, but also layoffs. Mass layoffs are the #1 way to make a stockholder's cock hard, but also a guaranteed way to kill a game's forward momentum.
Oh hey, how'd Overwatch get here?
AAA games are made by hundreds or more, often thousands of people. Look at how many more people work at Nintendo. It's nearly doubled in the course of 15 years. Their output has stayed almost the same, maybe even slowed with double the employees. That is a testament to how large the dev teams are, and in companies that aren't as kind to their employees, like here in the West, where layoffs are not only frequent but often expected, it's no surprise that the main games we play are not only old but waning.
A higher turnover rate than your ancestors every time they hear you listening to my nonsense.
This level of instability causes games to be unable to feel unique because uniqueness stems from one or a small group's vision, not a council making decisions with the main goal to have mass appeal. The objective of mass appeal fights with the goal of an artist. In this goal for more players to play games like Overwatch, we have lost what made them so unique. Overwatch was always an FPS MOBA, not an FPS with MOBA elements. It may seem like a small difference, but it is that difference between Overwatch 1 being Game of the Year and Overwatch 2 being the worst reviewed game of all time. All of this pressure to make the games more appealing to more people and need to last as long as possible has caused the entire AAA multiplayer genre to feel drier than my DMs and more generic than AI-generated pop. The general instability in the games industry is heavy to deal with, but we will return to another golden age of AAA games. Whether it's in a few months or a few years, many games are coming out and continue to be announced. We are getting fresh and new experiences, and many of them are beginning to find their own style. Those games will experience the same decay of short-sighted investors.
I really can't see the problem. Ah, shit.
Once that happens, we will again have to have the conversation that AAA is feeling terrible. So what causes this cycle? And why is it that from the outside, it looks really easy to say that games are declining? Well, I mean, 2 cognitive biases play into it. It's easier to look at 2 points and draw a linear line between them. Additionally, it's easier to have the rose-tinted glasses on when you're looking at the past.
This game's fucking terrible. This game's fucking terrible. Remember when this game was good?
But there is a more tangible fact that games do take longer to develop, which is a large part of what causes these long periods without new games. And due to most companies trying to maximize profits, games are lasting longer and longer to try to recoup the cost of such a long development cycle, which leads to them starting to peter out in an extremely painful way. This increase in development time can be tracked to the start of the HD generation, and I don't mean the limp dick 720p HD. That only hurt Nintendo's output.
Somehow.
But with the introduction of PS4 and Xbox One and later the Switch, development on these high-res games caused a greater demand for better-looking titles.
Because apparently the reflection of your significant other in the TV does not count as good graphics in insert current year. What? Did you really expect me to have one?
The truth is, even when games were poppin', negativity is still what drives clicks. There's a reason that there's an entire genre on YouTube being why X person you have never heard of fell off, and kicked a baby. People are more interested in the news of everything collapsing around us rather than
everything is running as intended and the sun is shining. More at 6.
Another big part of it is when you're experiencing something for the first time, it has novelty in its favor. When you're playing a game for the 10,000th hour 5 years later, you're more likely to find the game boring and samey, especially when the game still looks similar to many other games in the genre.
So how would I, the highly qualified professional still yet to graduate high school, want these games to solve this?
No game was meant to be played for thousands of hours on end. No game is able to withstand the feeling of thousands of hours of thousands of players playing for so long. First, games need to have a consistent vision through development and for at least the next 3 years. If it's a form of live service title, the goals should be upfront and the art style should aim to do something we haven't seen before. These games need to run on any machine. So if that's the case, we need to focus on a unique art style rather than next-gen realism. Another key benefit of this is that big games need to keep their dev teams reasonable. If we want them to be able to keep affording to make unique and specific titles, there should be minimal disruptions to a game team during development, and there should be as few team leads and team lead changes as possible. The more people you have working on something, the closer it gets to average. Think of it as if you take 3 people off the street and strap them to a chair. 2 of them might be into it, but 1 of them might kick you in the teeth. That doesn't mean that 2/3 of people are into getting strapped down. It just means that 2/3 of people you grabbed are. While if you grabbed 1,000 people, only 1/8 of them might enjoy it. A small sample size can massively skew results into the way you want. I mean, another benefit of a small team other than being able to pick from specifically the most skilled is it also leads to better communication and to try to aim for unique concepts even if a game must be decided by council. And for the love of God, stop going for the same futuristic modern bullshit style that is 90% of AAA games. It's a fun style just egregiously overdone in the shooter and car soccer sectors. Is AAA dead or declining? No.
My car's radiator is still getting replaced.
But are games in a lull?
Yes.
However, I do strongly believe they will get better, though when is a different question. The macroeconomic situation, at least currently, isn't in favor of any of these changes I suggested to increase stability in the industry. There is a reasonable hope for games to shake their decline and become more unique once again. The same way the cycle nearly reset back in 2015, I said nearly, as games when taken as a whole share so much variance that while multiplayer FPSs may be a genre in and of itself, it can take years to see the whole scene be uprooted. Between more strategical shooters, extraction shooters, hero shooters, battle royales, and others, it makes sense that the long development cycles will cause a massive lull, when considering how many games a decidedly small number of studios and even smaller amount of companies, after all the Microsoft acquisitions, are left able to make these high-tier AAA games. Honestly, almost every studio Microsoft has acquired has already made incredibly generic-feeling games.
It's almost like they are the gatekeepers of the generic game syndromes or GG's epidemic.
So, to answer the question originally posed, AAA is declining, but not in the way most people think it is. It's not that the AAA industry is getting worse, it's that the games themselves are, experiencing a natural point of saturation and boredom related to them being on life support for longer than a Simpsons marathon. However, The Simpsons is a really good comparison to the state of live service titles. When it's a ship of Theseus problem, making a piece of media, of course it's going to be compared to its golden age. You can't beat when a piece of media was viewed at its peak, especially with half a decade or more separating you from it. It's not that the new leaders are worse, it's that the new leaders are worse at working with what is already there than the ones who brought it there. While the games that are being dragged out are feeling more generic due to the sheer amount of time we as players put into them, but also because the developers of these games do not have the stability conducive to a healthy game development environment, leading to these products themselves feeling generic. Because anything that has passed between 15 different people will have small changes in all directions that will eventually result in a product that is in the middle, making no one happy but everyone think of it as fine. You ever play a game of telephone?
No, not that telephone! But I was almost at level!
the message becomes entirely different than what was originally given. But when it comes to AAA games, this is not only an unintended result, it is also the result of simplification to increase the mass appeal of a game to an audience that otherwise might not be interested in a game focused on a single demographic, who would really enjoy a specific game. Specificity is not a feature that the developers can spring for. Not when they have corporate breathing down their necks demanding they reach unrealistic sales goals and other unrealistic expectations. You lose the deep appreciation that some people can have to gain general appeal. So, games have gotten more generic, and it may even have become too late for it to be prevented from spreading even further into the many titles that have been recently announced and upcoming, but that will only be decided when they are actually released. That being said, we have to avoid GGs from spreading, because I don't want any more games to be game overed.
Shit, I've contracted GGs while talking about these generic games. Looks like it's GGs for me.